they asked me to come here to talk about social entrepreneurialism. It's a dubious term anyway, but and why they asked me is because some of you may know I'm involved with a crowd called Group Call, which makes technologies for the education sector. I'm not going to plug them, but I'm just trying to explain what I'm doing here. And I talk to conferences, education conferences, and head teachers and teachers quite a lot. I don't know if you know that thing, Teachers TV. One of my companies does that, and it's not going to be on air for very much longer because the government have just killed it. Thanks, guys. Nice. But things like that are going to be the first to go. And within a month, I think, of the new government getting in, they were trimming the fat on, I guess, Teachers TV, though I loved it, and I think it provided a service, and I think it's part of where education will be. It probably was okay to sacrifice it, though it will cost my company 30 jobs. Now, it's an example of what's coming down the track, of course, and we may have different points of view politically, but we all understand economically where this country stands. And it'll be a while before we get out of it. And I'm sad because the children that you teach, and that in fact you've just been released more to teach with the new white paper, which frees you guys up quite a lot, I'm glad to say. Those children will be emerging into a world that was very familiar to my generation in Ireland, and indeed here, which is why my band evolved out of the punk era. So my contemporaries were the Pistols and the Clash and bands that maybe you grow up with. And the rage and the nihilism that erupted from their mouths was the fact that they were 19 and they had been told, go through this system and there's something for you, and there wasn't. So the voice of that frustration was this crowd of people. In Ireland, it was a different circumstance, but nonetheless, for social reasons, my band, the Boomtown Rats, came about, and the first line that you ever heard from me was the line in our first single, and it was, "The world owes me a living." And I would feel that the next few generations that you release out into the world may have that same sentiment. And if Johnny Rotten sang songs about no future and demanded or sung about an anarchy in the UK, it was for a reason. None of this was stupid. It was this sense of uselessness and terrible frustration. And all of us, and you don't need me reminding you, are staring, to say difficult is a euphemism, we're staring a terrible time for our children in the face. And it's a great failure of our generation that that should be so. And we look to you, as ever, to somehow turn out people with optimism that will steer the national genius to a happier place. And I don't envy the head teachers of this country. My neighbour in Kent, where I have a house, is a teacher. And she studied for a long time to be a head. And she helped turn her schools around, and eventually she got to be a head teacher. And she knocked on the head after 8 months. It was too much. She was collapsing under the strain, the workload. And so we lost someone of excellence. And our children lost another person of excellence. And I personally followed the white paper, and if the whole notion of the academies works to a greater extent, and if you are freer to do what you need to do, then possibly these sad periods we're approaching will turn out to have a happier end. But almost literally, it's down to you, your skills, your competences, and your job. And I don't envy you. I grew up in Ireland rather like today. It's so sad what's happening in my country. I feel so sympathetic towards them. Thousands of young people are flooding out of the country again. I was in India 2 days ago, and now the young Irish emigres of that time are pitching up in Bangalore and Mumbai, as they are in Canada, where I was the week before. Thousands of them. So all that intellectual capital, all that vigor, all that intellectual muscular rigor, gone. How do we rebuild out of it? But that was the life that I came into in Ireland, a zero economy. 92% of the economy was agriculture. The rest was the public sector. I wasn't interested in milking cows. I wasn't interested in being a civil servant, so I left. But while I was there, I didn't have any interest in school for lots of reasons. My family life was not great. My mum died when I was 7. My dad sold towels around the countryside. He'd leave on Monday, come back on Friday. So we were left to our own devices, myself and my 2 sisters. Understandably, I'd come home, I'd make my tea, put the coal on the fire and listen to rock and roll on the radio and read books. And I make no apology for the fact that in the midst of this unpleasant living, that little siren voice on that crackly radio station, Luxembourg, was a lifeline, because these boys and girls of that era, names that you know, John Lennon, Bob Dylan, etc., these whispering, siren, seductive voices articulated other possibilities, whole other universes of potential and plausibility and possibility. And so I make no apology for the fact that I still frame all my references to the world through the rhetoric of rock and roll. And while I was in India doing a few things, I was also playing rock and roll down in the south of that vast country. And I continue to do it. And that's why school never attracted me. I was a pain in the arse throughout the entire experience. And the more I was a pain, the more I sort of enjoyed it. And at the age of 13, I was reading books that were to do with, I suppose, the romance of poverty. I suppose we'll categorize it, except there isn't romance in poverty. It's awful. And the definition of poverty must be that it saps opportunity from every human. And I was reading Steinbeck and Dickens and Studs Terkel, the great Chicago journalist, and Woody Guthrie. We didn't have telly, so that's why I was reading so much. And I began reading about Africa. And I was reading about Africa because the Springboks were coming to tour Ireland, and my school was sort of the feeding ground for the Irish national football team. Of course, I refused to play, getting out of it deftly by suddenly adapting chronic, possibly lethal asthma. And I began to read about South Africa, where people who wore a different jumper to you, or had red hair or a beard, or whose skin was a different color, was less. And that struck me as being so preposterous, so clearly ridiculous, that you were less because your skin was a different color. I couldn't understand that at all. I thought it was such an intellectual absurdity that I began reading further and learned about anti-apartheid. So me and my mate Mick Foley, at the age of 13, we started the anti-apartheid movement. And I like to think, along with Foley, that he and I are both personally responsible for springing Nelson Mandela. And then further thinking, actually, you know, here I was, 13, deeply unattractive, so perhaps I just started anti-apartheid in the last desperate attempt to get shagged. But I mean, I don't know, those of you of my age will remember that cool anti-apartheid badge, the sort of yin-yang black and white thing, and as I was the sole agent of distribution of this artifact of cool, hey baby, want one of these? I'm the guy. Except they didn't care. So that was a useless ploy. But the point about it is that in retrospect, I was kind of doing what a fellow Irish skeptic, George Bernard Shaw, said, that all change in the world comes through the power of unreasonable people. You possibly know that quote. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable person persists in adapting the world to himself. And I think that that must be the essence of entrepreneurialism, that the individual feels discontent with the world they're given, sort of unhappy, can't make a go of it, can't grasp it, can't get traction or purchase on this slippery thing. And so they invent a universe within which they can be comfortable themselves. And I think that must be what goes on. I think it must be certainly what goes on in business. And if you look at the classic entrepreneurial type, whether it's Winston Churchill or Richard Branson or any of these people who had odd upbringings and were not capable in school, they seem to make the world pay attention to them by inventing a universe within which they could function. And then people would pay attention to them. I mean, it was Churchill who, throughout the 30s, persisted in going against the political grain to everyone's annoyance, until eventually it swung around to that. Branson, who was crap in school, who was awkward in society, invented a way that he could come out. And it's a phenomenon in pop music. I mean, Gordon Sumner, Sting, was one of you lot. He was the classic geography teacher. Sting was inside, he couldn't get out. So he had to invent another name, and then he became a mega rock star. They're friends of mine, I know these guys. I can't see where Gordon Sumner is anymore until we're deep in conversation. Then the teacher comes out again. And I go to bed. Bono used to stand at this bar where we used to play and just stare at me, and I go, what? Yeah. And then he invented, instead of Paul Hewson, Bono was invented, and he could become a megastar, but I have to point out he's still shorter and fatter than me. Still. And I think that's what I was doing. Whatever I was reading was much more important than the world I was living in. At 14 and 15, I just didn't go home anymore. I just went out left school, went into the middle of Dublin, found a crowd called the Simon Community, which sounds a religious outfit, it wasn't. And what we do is we get vegetables from the grocers for free. And around 2 in the morning, we'd get bread from the bakeries as they did their first rounds of the hotels. We'd go to Smithfield Market and we'd light fires and we'd make a huge soup from the stuff we had, and the drunks and the lost men and women and the hookers, not the glamorous Hollywood types, but these pinched, whey-faced, beaten-up girls would gather around this fire and have their soup, and we'd make flasks and we'd go on our rounds and we'd talk to these schizophrenic bag ladies, I suppose. And that was much more interesting to me than, obviously, whatever was happening in school. And all of these factors led to, I suppose, the thing that people know more about from me than ever, which is the whole Band-Aid thing. But it could only come about because I found a means of articulating what was going on in my head. And I found an expression for that at a period of time where people wanted to hear that. And So when I wrote a song when I was working in the abattoirs in Dublin, a song called Rat Trap about the people I was working with, I wasn't to know that I would ever be in a rock and roll band and that that would be a #1 record. And it would be a #1 record because there were a lot of children who felt the same thing, that they were somehow trapped in this thing. It isn't what I'd intended, but it is what happened. And so when I turned on the television one night and saw 30 million people in a continent 8 miles from ours, dying of starvation, when the argument in 1984 was about the common agricultural policy and how we would pay 49% of our European taxes to grow surplus food, which had no value because it was subsidized, and therefore cutting the markets of the poor, and paid further taxes to store it, and then most obscenely in the face of this monstrosity, further taxes to destroy it. The following day after seeing that, I said on some radio show that to die of want in a world of surplus was not only intellectually absurd, it was morally repulsive. And the way I articulated it was through a pop song, which is what Megan referred to. And in those days of monolithic broadcasting, of course, everyone had seen this news report on the BBC of the Ethiopian famine. I hadn't considered that, of course. But once again, this little piece of plastic became the focus of all that rage and that shame and that anger, so brilliantly expressed by the journalist in the report. So I don't know if that's social entrepreneurialism. I got lucky. I got into a job where I had access to the media. It would have been much harder for any one of you to do it. You've got a different job. You perhaps could have turned on your school to organize something. Maybe you did. You could have come to a conference and said, let's all do this, but it would never have had the impact. So why do you do it? Well, I do it because change is not immutable. Change is vital. Change is desirable. Even if you're not sure what it's going to amount to, it'll amount to difference. And out of that difference, there will be good. There may possibly be bad. And so as we face now an almost existential period in European economics, and with so many other existential problems of climate change or nuclear proliferation, it seems to me that the notion of social entrepreneurialism becomes more profound, which is essentially what I think these children we've just seen have been talking about. And going into the next 3 or 4 years, we have to be much kinder to each other, because there's a terrible life for thousands of people coming right down the track. And we're going to need to bind together. We need to go to have a greater sense of community and sense of what we are and who we are, and try and help those people out. And we can take a distanced economic or political view, but we can agree that for many, many, many people, their lives are going to be extremely difficult. And so, to make a plea for something that is euphemistically called social entrepreneurialism is really to make a plea for just a little more pity and a little more kindness and a little more effort to make us bind together. And that would not be a bad thing at all. I've got a couple of companies. I still play rock and roll, but already I know we're going to have to lose a lot of jobs. I hate it, because I don't know where those people are going to get newer jobs. And I will do everything to my utmost to ensure that they somehow have some sort of comfort, that they have some sort of forward-looking plans. Now, you deal with that on a daily basis. But I don't know how you can pretend or lie to your children, your students, that what they're facing is this great rosy future should they just go through your portals and leave with the required exams. But the native genius of this island is creativity and ingenuity. It's still a vastly powerful economy, 5th or 6th in the planet. It'll slip down, it has to. But that's an exceptional idea. To be the 5th largest manufacturing economy in the planet. Extraordinary. Most of us think that Britain doesn't make anything anymore. Yet 13% of our GDP is manufacturing, far greater than financial services, which brought us to this pathetic pass. So this country has to somehow, once again, reinvent itself through ingenuity and brilliance. And it has the capability of doing that, but it does not have that capability without you guys. It does not. And I spoke to 2 heads before coming in here, and their excitement at the possibilities of the future, being just allowed that greater freedom to determine their own budgets and where their specialities should lie and how children behave with new technologies, is infectious. And they're amazed, as people of my generation are, with the way that children just automatically handle technology and how they can do this and do that and the other all simultaneously. Well, so what? If we'd have had that technologies, we'd have done it. There's also a downside. Maybe they just can't sit with the book and get lost. You constantly hear about why aren't children free to be bored anymore? Because they don't know how to be bored anymore. I'm useless at being bored. I get panicky and frightened that nobody loves me anymore and I must dream up 600 new things that morning. But I'm not sure about all this stuff. New technology is entirely empirical. It works through a dreadful, stultifying logic. I click this on a stupid, jerky arrow that goes around the place and something pops down and takes ages to get there. And if I want to do it, then I have to go to this, and that takes me there, and then I go to another place, and that goes there, and look at that. Isn't it great? No. Because my mind can do it like that, and hurry up, you know. And because I'm having to go through this empirical logic of ones and zeros, oh, fuck off. You know? You know, apps, so what? You know, wow, isn't that, hey, it's cool. What? You know, hey, look, if I do this, it looks like a pint. I go like this, you know, look. Shut up. All that human ingenuity to make a piece of mechanics look like a pint of beer. It does amazing stuff, but it is not the be-all and end-all. And it's tiresome. I use it, I don't use it. You know, in my case, I don't do email because it bores me. And I don't want people getting to me. And I'll tell you something which is not supposed, I don't know, you know, I just get on stage and I just talk. I don't know what happens. My mate, we have a production company called 10 Alps. A lot of the documentaries you see on TV are ours. He looked exhausted, beyond exhausted, sort of when a marriage or a relationship is breaking up. And I said to him, is everything okay at home? And he said, yeah, why? And I said, you look like crap. And he said, oh, I'm tired. And I said, well, you know, are you sleeping? He said, yeah, but I'm getting up, 4 in the morning. I said, what? And he said, no, I have to because I'll get 2 hours of emails in, then I'll take the kids to school. And, and then by the time I get to the office, I'll have a response to the emails. And I just thought this is a complete madness. Literally, he's ruining his health. His home life must be a nightmare. He's exhausted so he can't function with regard to our company. What's the point of this? So I called in the managers that we have, and I said, when are you getting up? How much time do you spend on your emails? And it was ridiculous. Now remember that you pay managers, like you guys are paid, to run the company. You're paying for this. I'm not paying for other people's ideas to be responded to. I'm paying for those people because they're very good to run this company, which has several hundred employees. So I said, can we not stop this email fascism the tyranny of the mail. And can we not put on these from this day, at the end of every mail, the response to this email will not be open till 2 p.m. the following day. And they all thought that was bonkers, but I forced it through the board. And they tried it out. And so now our mails, we send out the mails, the response, it says at the bottom, will not be open till 2 p.m. the following day. Any difference? No. Was there an uptick on business? A slight, but you can't say it was down to that. Were they better relaxed? Were they better engaged with the company? Absolutely. So it was time that was seized back. You could have your own agenda. I mean, you'll probably think that's rubbish. You probably love email. But I'm just talking about the dreadful empiricism of new technologies. I'm not so sure. Musicians are the first to take any technology, use it, find what it can do, and move on. And that's because they just want to make noise. So they get it, they rip open the box, they chuck away the manual, they go, you know, and like a child, they intuitively work their way around this thing, whatever it does. Then the noise becomes boring because everyone's using it, and they move on to the next thing. I think children do that. They're intuitive with this stuff. But to find yourself fascinated by it is to fool yourself. It's simply a device and a tool. And to say that our future is entirely geared around this and the unemployed will do this, no. I mean, one of the kids at this school had a great idea. They're going to visit old people. They're going to bring new technologies, computers to them. They're going to find ways of getting them for cheap. And they're going to show old people how to use new technologies. Now, that's spectacular. That's really good, because it doesn't matter if the old person wants to use the technology or not. But here's a young, bright, sparky person who wants to engage with them as they become more and more isolated in our vociferous society. And if they can leave Skype on and see the grandchildren on a 24-hour basis, then good. But the main benefit will be a reconnection between young people and older people. And as we look at this terrifying prospect of the next 4 or 5 years, as we stare at the demise of probably the euro in the face, if we wonder whither Britain, then all this stuff becomes more necessary. This social entrepreneurialism in this great time of need is simply a binding together. And in that, you get a binding of the wound. And I don't know what part the schools, the teachers, and the heads will play in this, but I'm certain that we don't get out of this mess without your critical lead. I don't envy it. I think it's a lousy job. God knows how I got involved in your game at all. But we have built, because of your generosity in the past, tens of thousands of schools, still building them throughout Africa. In 2005, because of the Commission for Africa Make Poverty History and Live 8 and the cancellation of debt to the poorest countries, within 6 months, 42 million children went to school for the first time ever. And when I say 42 million, you must pause and think practically the entire population of Britain, all those sentient human brains flicked on, all that creativity, all that productivity, all that intellectualism, all that dynamism plugged in to the global common wheel. Good stuff. And then Teachers TV, and now this stuff. I said, what am I doing here? You know, seriously questioning myself. All I know is that, you'll correct me now, all the history teachers will bollock me for this, but I don't know, wasn't it that freed Roman slave? Was it Euripides said, only the educated are free? It's totally true. Freedom isn't in that technological box. Freedom is in what you give to them. They want me to talk about social entrepreneurialism, possibly because schools are the apotheosis of the social entrepreneurial hand. And I suggest that never before have we required this generation of children to emerge from your academies and your schools and all the rest of it without some positive idea about how this country can stay somewhere in the listings where it can provide for its citizens a lifestyle that is enviable. But it's up to you. The thing that I keep in I work out of the kitchen in the house, which drives the missus ballistic. But in the cupboard in the kitchen, beside the cups and plates, it's my cupboard. That's where I keep my papers. There's a quote from Goethe, I'm sure you're familiar with it, the great German poet. Whatever you can do, or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, magic, and power in it. That's true. Good luck. Thanks.